Thank you everyone for joining us today for this Education Writers Association webinar on taking a solutions journalism approach to reporting. I'm Stacia Cedillo, a program manager here at EWA. So let's go ahead and begin. Let me introduce today's speaker, Matthew Kauffman. Matt leads a data reporting project for the Solutions Journalism Network, helping newsrooms pursue solutions reporting by identifying positive deviants, which are outliers in data that might point to places or programs successfully responding to social problems. Prior to joining Solutions Journalism Network, he worked on the investigative desk of the Hartford Courant, where he was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in Investigative Reporting for a series on mentally ill troops sent to war. He also serves on the board of a number of journalism organizations dedicated to promoting open government and a free press. So I'm going to hand it over to Matt, who I know has a presentation.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Stacia. I appreciate it. And thanks to everyone who has joined. I have marveled at the work that education reporters have done over the last incredibly unusual year, and am just amazed at how you just cranked out under terrible circumstances in all sorts of ways, and really served your communities and all of us. So I thank you for the work you have done over these last 15, 16 months of craziness, and very appreciative that you are taking the time to join us today. As Stacia said, my name is Matt Kauffman. I work with the Solutions Journalism Network to enhance the use of data in solutions reporting. And my goal today is kind of twofold. First, to describe what solutions journalism is for those who may not be familiar with it, and then to demonstrate how valuable data can be in pursuing solutions reporting, and in particular, how data can help us find places with an evidence-based record of success, one of the kind of key goals in solutions reporting. I want to make sure we have time for questions at the end, so I'm going to dive right in. Those of you who already view your work through a solutions lens, I suspect understand how powerful it can be in producing meaningful stories. For those who may be new to the concept or could use kind of a refresher, solutions journalism, I literally was at the end of my slideshow, not the beginning. There we go. There. Solutions journalism, you can see here, rigorous and compelling reporting about responses to social problems. I've always liked this definition from one of our co-founders, and all of the words here are important. Solutions journalism is rigorous. This isn't about taking anyone's word for it that a policy is effective. It relies on your investigative skills to really dive in, evaluate how a policy was implemented, how good is the evidence that it's having the desired effect. And it calls for a critical eye. This isn't advocacy or fluff. And in fact, reporting on the limitations of a response is really as important as reporting on what appears to be working. Some, I think, wrongly see this as kind of an alternative to, or worse, is the opposite of kind of hard-hitting accountability journalism. And frankly, that was my initial reaction when I first learned of it. But now I really see it as kind of a natural partner to that sort of, serious work, of going beyond the important role that we as journalists play in exposing and reporting on social problems, and expanding that to include an equally important role of critically analyzing and vetting responses to those problems, again, with an eye toward identifying those responses with a strong evidence-based record of success. And so solutions journalism, in my mind, becomes even more powerful when paired with kind of another, must-have skill in journalism these days, and that is data journalism. Just adding some basic data literacy to your reporting toolkit, I think, can significantly elevate your solutions journalism by giving you the power to identify what we call positive deviance. That may be a familiar term for some of you. If not, I know it sounds a little like the name of a cheesy garage band, but positive deviants are actually the key to some terrific solutions reporting. In the solutions journalism world, a positive deviant is a place or an institution that appears to have found success responding to a social problem, and typically in a way that has eluded similar places or institutions. And don't take my word for it, just check out this dictionary definition that I most certainly didn't create with a stock image and Microsoft Word, but nevertheless, for the visual learners out there, a positive deviant, a place or institution that appears to have found success responding to a social problem in a way that has eluded similar places or institutions. And data can provide a lead to these positive deviants, because when the impact of a policy can be measured with numbers, it's easy to identify the high performers. So a positive deviant is an outlier, but in a good way, breaking away from the pack and performing better. Still, it can't be a lucky break or a statistical anomaly, or just sort of demographic good fortune, where one place has, say, way better outcomes in health or education, because as it turns out, everyone in town, that particular town happens to be like super rich. So when you find these outliers in data, these positive deviants, when you discover, wow, this high school has unexpectedly high graduation rates, or this district seems to have made real strides, integrating its schools. I want you to think of those data points as a tip, as kind of a hot lead on a potential story, but just a tip. It's the starting point. You'll have more reporting to do to kind of dig in, see what's going on, see if there's a specific policy, a specific response that's behind that impressive outcome. And if that's the case, if your investigating shows that the better performance by the numbers can be tied at a high level of confidence to specific policies that were put in place and that appear to really be working, to be moving the needle, that can help us in this kind of grand quest to tell our readers and viewers who's doing it better. So much of solutions journalism is built around that question. So it's the state that put specific protocols in place to protect mothers during childbirth and significantly cut the rate of maternal mortality. This was great work here by Vox reporter Julia Bellas, and great use of data showing that California's, let me boost that a little, showing California's maternal mortality rate started a clear downward trend around 2008, while the rate nationally was sort of headed for a string of record highs. And the reporter tied that data trend to specific policies that were implemented in hospitals statewide to respond in particular to postpartum bleeding, which is a significant factor in maternal deaths. So great solutions reporting there, great use of data in solutions reporting. Similarly, it's the school district in one state that found ways to narrow the persistent educational gap between Black students and white students that continue to plague so many other schools. As part of a broader series, Trish Crane of AL.com, I know a friend to many of us, Trish analyzed data for every school district in Alabama to find those that were narrowing the achievement gap. So places like Pike County that cut the gap in third grade math scores in half. Now, before diving into the data, Trish didn't know, which school districts had made significant progress or how they did it, or if any did. But knowing how to analyze the data basically tipped her off to Pike County, as a potential story. And then deeper reporting revealed the factors that appeared to be making a difference. A new superintendent came in and made some changes, protected instructional time for teachers, promoted cultural understanding, and increased the focus on project-based learning at the higher grades, build collaborations with area two-year colleges. These are responses, that appear to be making a difference in Pike County, and responses that are replicable just about anywhere. Lastly, it's a reporter in Washington State looking at data from across the country and deeply exploring, the question that you see here. Massachusetts is a lot like us, so why are its schools so much better? And I particularly like the framing in this subhead here. What are they doing that we aren't? That's a great question, right? So this is a story where Claudia Rao of the Seattle Times started with the data, beef this up a little, showing how Massachusetts fares on a scale created by Education Week that gauges how well states prepare their children for adult success. So sort of a complicated algorithm here. And if you look at those gray bars in the middle, that's showing the impact on children during their school years. You can see that Massachusetts, which again the story points out is similar in a number of respects to Washington State, but that Massachusetts does a whole lot better in those school years than Washington State does. So Claudia started with that kind of intriguing data point, and then dug in, to what was going on in Massachusetts, and kind of reported how that state over the last 20 years had moved ahead of every other state on that particular metric, with targeted investments in early education, extending the length of the school day, adding more teacher training. Again, responses that appear to contribute to a better outcome, and responses that Washington State or any state could pursue. All right, so those are a few stories kind of showing how a focus on positive deviance can lead, I think, to some terrific solutions journalism, putting the focus on concrete responses that are making a difference and making a difference for the better. So what I want to do now is kind of start at the beginning, see how kind of diving into data can point to some solutions stories. But before I do that, I thought we've been at this, I guess, about 15 minutes. I'd maybe stop here and see if there are any questions about the stories that we've looked at, or about positive deviance, in general, or solutions journalism. But anyway, a pause here that you can type questions or thoughts into the chat for Stacia to pick out. And if there are none, that's fine too, but I thought I'd pause and give folks a chance to chime in.
None so far, but we may want to give people a minute or so, or if you want to keep going, Matt, and I can read them out as they come in.
That sounds good. So let me introduce what we're going to do next, and then before we sort of fully dive in, if there are questions, and
yeah.
I guess there are.
Before you start, here's
yes.
one. Jessica Kelman is asking if you have links that you could share about the Pike County and the Washington State stories.
I don't have them super handy, but I have them and should have thought to. So if there is going to be anything on the EWA website in the past, I can include those links. And come to think of it, there's actually a handout that I use in some trainings that could be valuable. Yes, so yeah, these and other resources we'll make available.
Okay, yeah. So we are recording this, and we usually get our recordings up within the first day. So we can include that handout just whenever you get a chance to send it over, Matt.
Good.
And actually, Trish Crane is in the audience, so she has the link for us. So I'm going to share that. Thank you, Trish, for the Pike County story.
Yeah, it's a wonderful story, and an almost perfect example of using positive deviance in one fashion, of taking, a more or less blind dive into a data set, not knowing what might be there, and working with it, doing some sorting, seeing what kind of rises to the top, and coming up with a tip you may not have known about before of a place that's worth a deeper look. See if there's something exciting going on there. All right. So if there is nothing else, at least at this point, I will at least set up what's coming next. And again, feel free to jump in, Stacia, if something does come in. So we're going to kind of go hunting for positive deviance. And for this exercise, we're going to look at persistence and retention, and specifically looking at first-year retention, or well, maybe it's second-year retention, but sort of that all-important decision to return for a second year of college. Very important metrics for the colleges themselves and for students. And you can see here the National Student Clearinghouse Research Center reporting that 76% of first-time freshmen in fall of 2018 made it back for the following year. Numbers are a little bit better when looking at four-year schools, but still, somewhat troubling there. I mean, we're talking about, a whole lot of money and a whole lot of importance in having a college degree going forward. So, important to learn about these figures, and important for schools to try to maximize their retention. So we are going to look at some data on retention and see if we can find some positive deviance there. But first, with this and with all data journalism, we need to have a sense of what we're looking at and what we're looking for. So what we'll be looking at is data that we get from the federal government on the percentage of students that returned for their sophomore year. We'll have it for a boatload of colleges, virtually all institutions, and there's multiple years of data as well. So we'll be looking at the percentages of students that make it back for a second year. So let's think about what we're looking for. When it comes to retention, what would a story about places that are doing better look like? What do we mean by success? And again, if you want to use the chat and offer some thoughts there, I could put it this way, I suppose. The schools that simply have the highest retention rates, the 99 percenters, the 100 percenters, are those our positive deviants? Are those schools that must be better serving their students in some way, doing things, better than other schools when it comes to retention?
Yeah, so if you have your own definitions, you asked, Matt, can you repeat your question?
Sure. So we're going to have this data that's going to show the percentage of students, school by school, that return for sophomore year. And we want to see, might there be a solution story in there, some tips to places that might be doing it better. So what should we be looking for in that data? Would it be as simple as just sorting which schools have the highest retention? And I could sort of ask that a different way. What sorts of schools would people guess, or actually names of schools that folks would guess would have the highest retention rates? Who are going to be our 99 percenters?
Well, I'm sure everyone is thinking very hard about this in their heads, and I'm sure they have responses, but they are not sending them through. So, oh, Maria Benevenito says, I would figure out which students or demographics seem to be at risk of not remaining for a second year and see who does a good job with those groups.
All right, so that is a fantastic point. That's we're already, thank you for that. You're at like Sojo 2.0 in that yes, it is, there is interesting insights that can be garnered by looking sort of broadly at how, in this case, colleges, or any place or institution is doing. But it's always important to look at data through an equity lens, right? Because, maybe a response that doesn't work for everyone isn't really a successful response. So yes, as we dug more deeply into this, definitely, if we could disaggregate how well are schools doing with different demographics, and particularly those historically at risk, that would be really, really important. So if there are no other thoughts, I'm guessing if people are thinking in their heads of who's going to have the highest retention, it's going to be, well, I bet, Harvard does pretty well, and the Ivy Leagues in general, and sort of those, name brand schools. But I don't know that that would necessarily mean, yes, Harvard clearly must have, the secret sauce and are doing something better that other schools, with those averages around 76% must not be doing. So we want to think, a little more clearly. And I have two thoughts if there are no other thoughts in the chat. So one, if we were to group schools together, that have something similar about them, because hey, maybe all the Ivy Leagues do really, really well, but maybe even among those, there's one that really stands out, and that might be a tip. There's no guaranteed story there. That might be a tip. Is there something that, this Ivy League with an enormous endowment, that can sort of often take finances out of the equation, with all the opportunities that they have, is there still one that sort of stands out, that outlier, that horse that was ahead of the pack? So looking at similarly situated schools and seeing if some stand out. And the other is looking at improvement over time. And that actually, a whole lot of solutions journalism is built around that idea of showing, wherever anyone started, are we seeing improvement there? So, in the California hospital case, I don't specifically remember if California was above or below the national average in 2008 when, its intervention went into play. But regardless, the fact that it showed such steady improvement is a good tip that maybe there's something interesting going on there. So that's actually how we're going to evaluate this retention data. We have grabbed data from IPEDS, that I'm sure many of you have worked with, and maybe just the homepage is giving you hives looking at it, but it is still nevertheless sometimes overwhelming, but a great resource. And if we were doing sort of a longer session, I'd kind of have us dive into the website, go kind of step by step through identifying the data that we want and downloading it. But in the interest of time, we're going to kind of jump ahead to the data already brought into Excel and cleaned up a little bit. So let me switch no, not that one. All right, I'm going to switch the screens that we're looking at, and this is an Excel spreadsheet with about 1,200 schools showing, you can see here their retention figures for 2010 and 2018, and also their enrollment numbers. And I included a couple of other pieces of information, public or private, the state that it's in, if we decided we want to, just focus on a particular state, and then whether or not it's a historically Black college or university. And I did, this started out with something like, and I should say I didn't select every school in the entire country. I decided just sort of arbitrarily for the purpose of this exercise, looking at 4-year public and private schools that offer at least a bachelor's degree, and then also filtered out schools where data was missing or appeared to be erroneous, like some schools had 0% retention, which may be the case, but would be sad. And also limited it to schools with at least 1,000 students enrolled in both years. Because really, really tiny schools, there could be, just a few happen to return or not return and have a big impact on the retention percentage. So somewhat arbitrarily, those are decisions I made, and then just added that column at the end. The only math we're going to do in a data presentation for the whole time, and it was simply showing the increase or decrease in the retention percentage figure from 2010 to 2018. And so if we were to just sort this, what we're talking about are the high flyers, are those our positive deviants. If I were to just sort by the 2018 retention figure, so the 99 percenters here, you know, not terribly surprising. Harvard, MIT, Stanford, Chicago, Williams, Yale, Duke's there, Princeton, Carnegie Mellon. Oh, good. Dartmouth made the list. My wife went there. She'll be happy it made the screen. But hey, not necessarily. You know, I wouldn't say, good, let me take the top 10 and devote a whole lot of reporting on what are they doing right. Again, if there were one that sort of stood out here, or if looking through here, you saw, is there one here that maybe isn't, you know, a household name? Does that give me a lead to something interesting? I see Carleton College at number 17. I have a niece that went there, in fact. You know, maybe something interesting going on there. They've been consistently high, but hey, they might be worth some reporting. Again, we're not looking for a top 10 list here. We're not looking for a best of the best. We're looking for tips of places that might be worth looking into. But again, we were thinking, let's look at the places that saw the greatest increase, you know, more or less over the last decade. So instead, I'm going to sort by that change figure from high to low, and see what we get. And you can see there are schools that made very dramatic increase from 2010 to 2018, 39 percentage points, 26 percentage points. And if you look at their retention numbers for 2018 retain, if you recall, right, the overall average we saw in the spread, the PowerPoint was 76%. Most of these are, you know, only barely at or below that figure. But that's okay. We're not looking for who has really high retention. Here we're looking for other places that may have moved the needle, that may have put a policy or intervention in place that had a positive impact. And I'm wondering if folks looking at, you know, the top 4 or 5 of these, anything stand out here, anything, you know, intriguing or worth a deeper look. I know that chat isn't the best format for sort of interactivity, but if anyone wants to type something in, something that they see that seems interesting, feel free.
Well, Alia Malik said she used to cover UTSA and she's surprised by their retention rate over time. Jacob Arnold says HBCUs.
All right. So yeah, so UT San Antonio. So look, if we look through data and someone, particularly someone, you know, covering the area says, I'm surprised by, I'm like, yay, right? Because it essentially shows, oh, okay, you know, this method sort of unearthed something, you know, interesting and maybe newsworthy. I mean, right? I think if you know, 20 minutes ago, we had said, okay, here's your quiz. Tell me, you know, give me the names of schools that improved their, you know, sophomore year retention the most over the last decade. I don't know that any of us could have, you know, come up with this, but with just kind of a little data comfort, data literacy, you know, we've now got a list of interesting schools, most on the smaller side, although maybe that reflects schools overall, but UT San Antonio also sort of stands out. The only school bigger than, I guess there's one that's almost 10,000, one at 5,000, the rest all somewhat smaller. And yeah, that HBCU breakdown is kind of interesting, right? There are, I believe, in this database, 57 HCBUs. They're more than that, but in the filtering I'd done, I think there are 57 HBCUs in here, and yet out of 1,200 schools in this list, but yet 2 of the top 4 are HBCUs, and that's intriguing to me, as a journalist and a data guy, and makes me wonder, is there something broader going on there? Might the consortium, have put things in play? So this might make me want to, hunt up, all right, where else? Let me scroll through. How did the other, or just filter on the HBCUs? How did they do? Contact some people in the know, find out if there's something going on there. So again, with these tips, I've now got sort of a group of schools I might want to do a little more reporting on, and probably some more data reporting. I might take the top 10 of these and let's get all of the years from 2010 to the most recent data, make sure it wasn't just a 1-year anomaly. See, is there 1 year it seemed to really change, and maybe that helps me when I do some deeper reporting. But yeah, I'm really intrigued by Harris Stowe State University. So it's the public school that saw the greatest increase. It's an HBCU. So let's imagine, I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint now, that one. And let's say we, did a little due diligence on Harris Stowe State University, and I did that, in fact, and found out that Harris Stowe has an entire separate office of retention, kind of dedicated to, keeping kids in school there. And you can see they have a peer mentor program, an early alert system, other programs specifically designed to keep students in school. And I granted, it was just sort of based on Googling. The sense I got is it's not like, yes, every school in America has an office of retention. I couldn't find a whole lot of sort of, web pages for schools showing a separate office with these sorts of programs. And I really like this description here. The Office of Retention aims to address the social, emotional, and academic needs of our students, which are important to students returning and ultimately graduating from HSSU. So, hey, there's more work to be done here, but maybe there's something interesting going on there. Maybe they have found a better way, and maybe they have some replicable policies that other schools could learn from. And I think that would make for a strong story if indeed that were the case. And someone built a solutions journalism story around that. Now, at the same time, it would be very important during your due diligence to see what limitations there might be in their approach. If it turned out, yes, we've done really well, but folks will tell you, but they also really changed how they admitted students. And all they really sort of did was, exclude students that they thought was going to make their numbers look bad and not give them the opportunity of an HSSU, education. I'm not saying they did that, but, the same rigor you put in to any story needs to be put into a solutions journalism story. If it doesn't explain the limitations of a response, it's not a solutions journalism story. All right, we're going to move on to the next section again, unless there are thoughts on what we've done with retention. I hope folks are thinking, hey, maybe I should do that story.
One question that came in, and I think you just kind of touched on it, is, what if better outcomes are mainly based on the socioeconomic stats of the students, and not really even before the school or college does anything?
Yeah, and so, right. So as I think it was Maria had mentioned earlier, can we disaggregate this data and say, wow, this looks really good overall, but now I want to dig a little more deeply, and make sure, is this reaching all students? And again, it's as I explained, right, why we didn't just, run a list of the 99 percenters, right? Because there are all sorts of things going on there other than, some great program that the school has. One thing to keep in mind sort of in all of this is, again, as I said, it's not about, crowning the best performer or coming up with, a top 10 list of schools getting it right kind of thing. This is a way to get tips to responses that appear to be working. So in a way, the schools are sort of secondary to the response that they're putting in place. So if, HSSU has this Office of Retention, if you could sort of establish, if the data showed, boy, they put this in place this year, and look at what, how things changed from that, that can be decent evidence that, that was helping move the needle. So I guess you'd want to investigate, is this working for all students? But some of it is, oh, all right, it hadn't occurred to me, this is a response a school could take. Other schools can then consider, putting that response or intervention in play, and hopefully with their own tactics to make sure, that it's being applied sort of across the board and hitting all students, regardless of, as I said, demographic good fortune.
And just to restate, where was it that you got that Excel spreadsheet of data? Was that IPEDS?
So this is IPEDS, yeah.
Okay, great.
And I actually have a very detailed, what we call story recipe, going kind of step by step with, screen grabs of IPEDS. So I will include that as well in the follow-up material. All right, I'm going to move on now with some radical transparency. We looked at, a school district that was narrowing the achievement gap, and a hospital saving lives, and, a college keeping kids enrolled. And I got to be honest here and say that none of those pieces is the kind of story that I was likely to pursue when I was doing data journalism at the Hartford Courant. As a general rule, when I dug into a data set, I was looking for clues to the bad actors, the poor performers. They're the ones that kind of need the spotlight, and I was hardly alone in kind of that view of the role of journalism, and certainly investigative journalism. The retention data that we just looked at, when it came to that kind of moment of truth to sort, the change in retention from largest to smallest or smallest to largest, like my instinct was to sort smallest to largest, focus on the laggards, the places that are kind of falling behind, the failures. That's kind of the investigative credo. There's another example I've used in trainings looking at central line infections. You can see here, kill thousands every year, nevertheless totally preventable. And after we've downloaded the data, we do this for hospitals in Illinois, there's this column in which the hospitals, each individual hospital's infection rate is compared to a national benchmark of what the federal government sort of expects, that individual hospital's rate to be based on a whole variety of factors, unique to that hospital. So we filter on, that field, that compared to national, and come on, look at these choices here. Better than the national benchmark, no different, worse than. And the investigative reporter in me is just like dying to click on worse than the national benchmark and, see who's screwing up, dig into what's going on there. What are they doing wrong? Are there like some systemic issues at play? And if you do that, you can indeed identify the hospital with the worst rate, at least on this particular metric in Illinois, and it's South Shore Hospital in Chicago, which also happens to be the hospital with the worst record in the entire country. And again, this metric this year. And if you're thinking, all right, well, full stop, that's the story, I have good news, because solutions journalism is not about turning a blind eye to poor performers. I'm not telling anyone to avoid pursuing stories like that. But here's the thing, if you were to also filter for the hospitals that are outperforming the national benchmark, doing better than expected, you'd find another hospital similar to that poor performer, both listed as what we call safety net hospitals. And that hospital, Mercy Hospital Medical Center, has one of the best records in the entire country. And if it turned out that that hospital had, implemented policies to minimize central line infections, and there was, data or other evidence that those policies really were making a difference, then I think including the places that are performing, better than expected, the positive deviants, including those in your reporting on the poor performers, I think will elevate your story. I think it just makes for better journalism. And in multiple ways. I think it improves accountability, show that a problem can be successfully addressed, and you kind of take away the ability of the bad actors to spout excuses for their failure. Hey, there's nothing we can do about it, and we've done what we can, and mistakes happen. None of those claims hold much water if you can show that mistakes don't have to happen, that there are places that have found a better way. So I think it's better accountability journalism. Secondly, it offers a possible path forward, that communities can investigate rather than simply kind of wallow in failure. It offers a degree of hope, not stories that sugarcoat problems, but stories that kind of pair in-depth coverage of problems with equally in-depth analysis of responses that other places could consider implementing. Again, not advocacy, but kind of laying out the facts that a community can consider in making decisions for the future. So I think it's strong public service journalism in that sense. I forgot to add that. And then lastly, I think it gives audiences the kind of journalism that studies consistently show that they want. Again, not sugarcoating problems, but problems that do more than simply kind of, wallow in failure. So I think it's journalism audiences want, journalism audiences will pay for. So I think it's great sustainable journalism as well. It doesn't mean every investigative story or every data story needs to be a solution story. So another important takeaway, if a problem isn't well known or well recognized in a community, then reporting on the problem, bringing it to light, that's really valuable and meaningful expose journalism. But if a problem is widely known, if everyone in the community knows the school buildings are crumbling, or there are inequities in discipline, or serious problems year after year with teacher turnover, then there's just not much value in yet another story kind of telling readers and viewers a depressing fact they already know. And I think that's where solutions reporting on who's doing it better is truly valuable, kind of taking the audience beyond the problem they already know about and putting the spotlight on carefully vetted responses that appear to be making a difference. I think it's just better journalism in the end. So if this piques your interest, know that Solutions Journalism Network is a terrific resource. We are committed to improving the use of data in solutions reporting. So if you have a solution story that has a data element to it, we're here to help, whether it's to talk through a possible story kind of early on, or when you're deep in data analysis and could use some guidance, or anytime in between. And I'll have my contact information on the screen in a couple of slides. If you want some deeper training, we've got you covered with our Learning Lab, offers multiple training opportunities, easy enough to remember, learninglab.solutionsjournalism.org. So before I open this up for questions, I want to wrap up with a final thought, share some advice that I got many, many years ago from a very, very wise fortune cookie. This is an actual fortune that I got years ago in a restaurant. And I think it was only when I started working with the Solutions Journalism Network that I kind of truly understood what the universe was trying to tell me here. So now I share that wisdom with all of you. Yes, pursue data, and when you find a great data set, put the data you have uncovered to beneficial use by recognizing the value of data in identifying positive deviance that can help you produce meaningful solutions journalism. And that will bring us to my last slide. Here's my email address, a couple of Twitter handles. Again, the network itself is just solutionsjournalism.org. And again, we are here to help. It's what we do. So if we can assist, please be in touch. And with that, let's open this up for any questions. I should say a colleague of mine has a great line that I've now borrowed or stolen, saying that I like feedback and pushback. So, you know, comments, questions, challenges of any sort, bring them on.
Well, thank you so much for that presentation, Matt. We do have a couple of questions. So one person asks, you know, let's say you come up with some promising findings. Do you then, how do you get it into those with the position to make use of it or to implement it? Do you identify organizations or institutions that are likely to publicize it or disseminate the findings? Is that something journalists should be doing, or there, you know, there is that kind of that fine line between journalism and advocacy? So,
right.
What say you on that?
Yeah. So as journalists, it's kind of interesting, and you know, I think many of us are grounded in this sort of, you know, we don't want to be picking winners. We don't want to be accused of advocacy. It's just like, I will put the information out there. Someone wants to run with it. That's great. And if not, hey, I've done my job. I think that mentality is changing a little bit, and to be honest, as I've thought about it, I mean, it was the foundation of my career, and I've recognized much more recently that comes from a certain place of privilege. You know, I sort of cared about the things I wrote about, and on the investigative desk, we were identifying what we thought were problems. But at the end of the day, it didn't really affect me if group homes were serving, you know, their clients better, or, you know, schools were doing a better job, or police were less discriminatory, right? I mean, it didn't personally affect me. And so I think individual journalists have to decide, do I have a role in putting out this information? But again, it is not advocacy. And if there are limitations, if it's, this place has found a great response, but it wouldn't work in a community that doesn't have a strong public transportation system, or something like that. That needs to be an integral element, and it's kind of what insulates you from someone going, you know, you're not supposed to advocate. You're not supposed to say, this is the solution you should do. Now, all that said, Solutions Journalism Network has a whole knowledge dissemination division, and their charge is actually to take, you know, strong responses and try to get them in the hands of those that can run with it, whether it's, you know, on the ground advocacy groups or government groups and the like. So we do have sort of a continuation process there, but that is sort of separate from, you know, what we call our practice change division, which works, you know, with newsrooms to try to get them to incorporate solutions journalism. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, someone had actually asked what another question related to what you just mentioned. They asked, Mindy Reiser asked, what kind of relationships has the Solutions Journalism Network established with the social science community? Is that part of your knowledge dissemination network, or are you more focused on government and agencies?
Right. So I think knowledge dissemination primarily, it's not the field the area I directly work with. So I know it's sort of somewhat third hand. Yeah, I think is primarily, you know, organizations and government groups. Certainly, you know, we certainly work with academics, both to, you know, promote solutions journalism at journalism schools, but also in getting, you know, a stronger understanding of how solutions work. If we're working with a news organization, you know, we will often advocate, look for, they're great experts in the social sciences. There are people who can, help you understand, is something really a meaningful difference? Is this working? So I don't think we at Solutions Journalism Network specifically work directly, with the social science community, but we sort of, encourage its use with journalists.
Right. So another question from Jessica Kelman is, do all solutions journalism stories involve data? Are there any great examples where the evidence isn't data driven?
Yes. So there are sort of stories that are, one great idea that seems to make a lot of sense, that you might look for data to establish, is it really having an impact? But in terms of finding the stories, yeah, lots of stories come from simply, knowing your beat and knowing that a particular place tried something really interesting. Again, data may come in, to play on the back end, for the evidence side. It does this really succeed. But the positive deviance approach is sometimes more sort of on the earlier side, to find a story, or this town implemented some policy to address whatever. Can we see how it compares to other communities? So it's funny, someone just this morning, I was on a call, was describing something as the, I think it was the washing machine in the school type of story. So a school serving a population that may not have easy access to laundry or free laundry decides, you know what, we're going to set up a laundry room in the school that students can use. That might, if we have an issue of students coming with clothes that don't appear to be clean, because getting them clean isn't as easy for some students as it is for other students. That's not a story you would find through data. You might ask them, can you tell us how many students are using it? Because if it's like, look at our great idea and no one is interested in using it, that's not successful. But yes, semi-long answer to a simple question. Certainly not all stories, rely on data to find them, and not all rely on comparative data, on positive deviant data for evidence.
That's a great example. So while I don't have any more questions right now, but somebody did ask, it's not necessarily a question, but back to your IPEDS data, where exactly can they go to look for that same data on retention rates?
So I will, let me stop sharing my screen. Yeah, so I will include that story recipe that will have a link. This is exactly where it is. These are, the different places to click, to filter by however you want to filter. So yeah,
great.
Tomorrow or so, go to ewa.org and that will be waiting for you.
Yeah, we'll put it right below the description is where we'll upload the link.
Terrific.
Get that up. Yeah. Are there any other questions out there? And while we're waiting, Matt, what's a question you feel like you get a lot of times about solutions journalism? And is there one question that you feel people ask a lot about it?
So on solutions journalism, the question is always, and it is the first question I ask, how is this not advocacy? And again, if you go in with the mindset, I'm simply looking for responses with an evidence-based record of success that other places may find it valuable to know about and may want to replicate. And I'm going to include all the limitations, that it maybe doesn't work for everyone, or it's really, really expensive, or it requires a certain infrastructure that not all places have. That's sort of how you avoid the advocacy label. On the data side, the question I get is sort of the correlation and causation. How do you know that a particular policy is leading to these better outcomes? And that sort of relies on sort of the same approach we do to all data stories, and the caveats that we have with data of recognizing correlation does not equal causation. But investigate that the way you would investigate sort of the failure of a policy. Well, police tried this approach and, bad things happened. How if you've sort of typically done things through more of a deficit frame, what have you used in your own, reporting and mindset to be satisfied with that? And then the bottom line is, right, we all make judgments in journalism. You need to come to the judgment, I'm satisfied that this policy, response, intervention, whatever, really is what moved the needle, in the data. And experts can help give you comfort in that, or otherwise point you away from that. But kind of at the end of the day, it's a journalist's individual judgment and satisfaction.
Well, we don't have any other questions, so people must be really chewing on what you've had to say. Actually, hold on. We have one. Taylor Swack, and this will probably be our last question. Taylor asked, how do you navigate whether to publish a solutions piece now or to hold off, perhaps until there's more evidence or data?
So that's a great question. I'm so glad you brought that up, because it is an important point in solutions journalism. There are lots of stories that might sound a little like they're solutions journalism, but there aren't. And on our website, if you were to search imposters, which is sort of a harsh word, but there are types of stories, a hero worship, one person does this one thing that only a billionaire can do, is not a solution story. Good idea, good intentions kind of thing isn't a solution story. This became problematic with COVID, where everything was sort of so new, and reporters wanted to write about interesting ideas, but there wasn't a whole lot of evidence behind them. So generally, yeah, look, there can be fine stories in, hey, a new policy is in place, a task force has been formed, but a solution story will be generally later down the road once there is some evidence. But if there's a policy that a place puts into effect in your community, and it seems like, oh, this is interesting, if that same policy has been used elsewhere in the past, then it could be a solution story. If it's, Kansas City is implementing blank and it's new, but Phoenix tried something similar and it seemed to really work. Again, if with all the caveats and the limitations, Phoenix isn't Kansas City, and you explore all that, that can become a solution story. But yes, generally you want evidence either from that location or from another place that the same intervention has been tried before it's a true solution story.
Great. Yeah, I'm glad that question came up. That's a really interesting thing to think about. Well, that is all the time that we have for today. Thank you so much to our speaker and presenter, Matthew Kauffman. Please check out his work at the Solutions Journalism Network and the work that they do. It sounds like you all have a lot of services, and sounds like you really like to engage and help reporters think through these things. So we really hope to see some stories come out of this. And if there are any, please send them to us. We'd love to see that impact as well. So before I let you all go, just a reminder that you're going to get a survey right after you close the webinar window, and we really hope that you take a moment. It should just take a minute or two to fill it out. Any comments or feedback you have for us, or any ideas that you have for us about a future webinar you think we should do. So thank you again to Matt, and thank you to everyone who joined us today, and we will see you next time.